Dual digital night vision is two better than one. If you're just getting into night vision, digital night vision is really appealing. It claims to offer much that analog can offer at a much more affordable entry price, with little downsides on paper apart from the most glaring one, that most digital devices need an infrared wash to be of much use. Which means that anyone with night vision will see your IR shining like a spotlight. Not visible to the human eye, but bright as a flashlight to anything that can see IR. Which is also way more common than you might think. Security cameras, Ring doorbell cams, iPhone front cameras, baby monitors, you get the picture. There's lots of cheap tech that can see IR. If you're trying to be stealthy against other human beings, your IR signature definitely is something to worry about. If you're hunting, hiking, or doing anything where your IR pollution won't make a difference, this becomes less of an issue. Some higher-end digital devices claim to offer nearly the same performance as analog, even without IR. While I've seen some impressive video evidence of those claims, the devices that offer those features cost as much as analog solutions. So the appeal really isn't there for those devices just yet. But if you're here, you likely already know that about digital devices and have accepted that you'll be using IR. If you caught my initial impressions video on the Wraith, you know I've been enjoying the unit as a monocular. If you haven't, check it out here. One of the questions I was asked a few times was how wide the FOV is on the Wraith. I was actually under the false impression that the Wraith had a 40-degree field of view. Boy, was I wrong. It's very narrow, coming in at 17 degrees. Truth be told, had I known this from the start, I likely wouldn't have even set out to try and make the Wraith do close quarters at all. But because that's just what I thought a 40-degree field of view looked like, I figured I better train and get good with it because I've seen videos of people clearing rooms with monoculars. So if they can do that with a 40-degree field of view, then I can manage not to stumble around my basement with one. And it really did become much easier after some practice. Even at 17 degrees, I found it decently easy to clear rooms. Your brain does a great job of combining what your non-dominant eye is seeing with the assistance of night vision and mixing it with what your dominant eye is seeing, having adjusted to the lower light. After a few weeks, I had no problem running basic drills and navigating with the monocular setup. I did hope by adding a second Wraith that I would gain some field of view, but I understood that adding a second Wraith wouldn't make the field of view wider without a panel bridge of some sort. To address another question I've received a few times, latency. When you unbox the Wraith, it'll be set to 30 frames a second and a medium exposure speed. This can certainly feel a little gooey, but I've never experienced any frame stuttering or the like. But if you dive into the advanced settings, you can switch over to 60 frames a second and the shortest exposure time. This makes for an image that is very snappy. All the footage in this video is shot and edited at 60 frames a second, so you can see just how smooth the image is. Personally, I cannot perceive any latency, even though I'm sure there are probably some milliseconds of delay there. But that is certainly not the thing holding back my performance. I'm not going to try and force the units to perform without IR, as I feel they perform very poorly in that regard. To disclose my professional relationship with Sightmark, they offered to send out a Wraith in exchange for some photos via Instagram. While taking photos for that first unit, I decided to order a second unit with my own money, and this is what you're seeing now. But for now, on to the question at hand. Is running a dual digital nod setup beneficial? Let's find out. I thought the answer was going to be obvious at first. I assumed running duals would translate to twice as much night vision, easier target focus with a slightly wider FOV. I was hoping to make passive aiming feel less claustrophobic. I also thought I would exaggerate this enhanced field of view by running a wide FOV pano bridge along with the dual setup. I ordered a second Wraith and the NVB58 pano bridge and was pumped to find out all the hardware worked great together. The Wraiths lock up to the NVB58 really snug, and even though the Wraiths are a little bulkier than the average PVS-14, everything still works great. I haven't noticed any range of motion issues or anything like that in my use. I love the form factor with the NVB58. The entire unit feels sleek when it's all stowed, and very handy still. I prefer being able to run the G24 Wilcox style helmet brackets. They feel way more solid than the Rhino ones to me. And pair the G24 mount with the NVB58 and the package is super compact and fully stowed. Plus you gain the ability to run the Wraiths half stowed, which means you can flip each eye down individually or the pair at any time. One of the bigger advantages has been keeping the units from sticking off so high off my head when stowed. I've caught the Wraiths on low basement support beams more than once on the stock mount, but with the NVB-58, the Wraiths don't stick up much past the helmet at all. Not using the stock bridge mount means I needed to supply power to the units via the USB inputs on the side. One battery running a single to dual USB cable solved this issue just fine, but to counteract the weight of the 2 Wraiths instead of one, I decided to add a second battery pack to the rear of the helmet and run individual cables to each Wraith. This makes for a pretty balanced experience, and I've been able to run the helmet for 4 to 6 hours without issue. Mounting the Wraiths on the NVB as soon as the second tube arrived meant I did not get to experience the native dual setup though for a while. I did end up ordering the Lions Gear Dovetail adapter for the stock bridge, just to give the native setup a try on the G24 mount. More on that later. One of the quirks of the NVB-58 is the angle that it mounts the Wraiths at. The unit was designed for PVS-14s, which have circular tubes with a circular viewport. No matter how you angle the PVS-14, what you see through the device is ultimately the same. The Wraiths, however, house 16:9 displays, which means as you rotate the units into view, the 16:9 displays become canted at 45-degree angles opposite each other. I'll be honest with you, I initially thought this was going to mean that the NVB-58 was a no-go for the Wraiths, but while waiting for the Lions Gear adapter to arrive, I was still using the Wraiths at night to take my pup out, and I was doing some dry fire stuff, getting a decent amount of hours behind the NVB setup. To my surprise, the Canted screens were growing on me. Oddly, having the displays canted at 45-degree angles meant that I was also gaining some vertical FOV as well. Because the field of view is so narrow, when the Wraiths are spread to the 58-degree throw angle that the NVB-58 offers, the images don't combine at all. You're actually seeing independent information in your left eye and your right eye, which does translate to a much wider perceived field of view than using a single Wraith, but it feels really disconnected. I felt like I was having to think about which eye was doing the dominant focusing too much. If something would catch the attention in my left eye's peripheral vision, I would want to look at it, but then I would have to think focus out of that eye to see it, and then vice versa for my right eye. When it was time to passively aim at that object, I had to then think look out my right eye, but that is not seeing the same image. So then I had to turn my head and find that image again in my right eye. It was pretty disconnected feeling for sure. I didn't feel like I had gained an advantage by adding a second Wraith when mounted in this fashion, but it did show off one downside of digital night vision in general that isn't really talked about as much. You don't look through digital night vision, you look at digital night vision. With digital, it's a camera sensor looking at the target and you're looking at the viewfinder at the back here. So because of the exaggerated field of view of the NVB-58 and the tight FOV of the Wraiths, this setup really didn't work well. The images could never combine. The Lions Gear adapter installs super easy. Remove this screw on your original mount and the claw section pops off, then screw this dovetail mount in its place. This type of mount would be awesome to see included with the Wraiths, as lots of people prefer the G24 style mounts, myself included. Compared to the NVB-58, the stock bridge doesn't have any built-on anchor points for stabilizing the bungees. So to solve this issue, I drilled 2 small holes into the bridge to allow my bungee cables to attach at the extreme ends of the device. This really stabilized the dual Wraith setup. The biggest reason I wanted to try the Lions Gear mount with the sight mark bridge was to try the dual Wraith setup with the 16:9 displays side by side. In my mind, that was going to solve the issues I was having with the Canted screens. The largest advantage I feel is the added depth perception. Running the dual Wraiths with the stock bridge gives you a great sense of 3D space, something that you don't have much when running it as a monocular. The added depth perception added by both eyes receiving visual data makes walking around with such a tight FOV much more manageable. There is something special about the first time that it truly lines up and your brain stops seeing 2 screens and sees 1 display. Suddenly it feels like you're seeing augmented reality more so than trying to look at the screens in front of you. Your eyes finally focus beyond the Wraiths and see the target as 1 image in 3D space. It's really awesome. Something that never happened with the Canted screen setup, honestly. I really wanted that to work because I love the form factor and the build quality of the NVB-58. But for the 2 16:9 displays to work well with each other, they need to sit side by side and they need to see the same thing. They can't see that wider image. I will definitely hang on to the NVB-58 for when I start venturing into analog though. As of filming this video, my favorite way to run the Wraiths is with the Lions Gear Dovetail mount on the sight mark bridge, a single battery pack mounted vertically in a Velcro pouch. I run the IR disabled on my dominant eye so I can passively aim if I need to. I run the IR enabled on my non-dominant eye so I can see in the dark, with the throw pattern just wide enough that when I have my rifle shouldered, the IR doesn't hit it. As far as my advanced settings inside the unit, I have both units set to 60 frames a second, the shortest exposure speed, medium contrast, and the lowest ISO. The built-on displays I have at the lowest brightness. I do this so my eyes can naturally adjust to at least some level of night vision, or in case I have to pop the nods off for any reason. It's still very bright to me, and I could honestly go for a few clicks lower of dimmable settings. Once you're out in the pitch black, it can still feel a bit bright. Speaking of pitch black, let's talk about the performance of the unit in total darkness. No moon, very dark outside. These are the moments I'm most impressed by the Wraiths. We've already accepted that we're gonna be using IR, so with that in mind, the performance is pretty mind-blowing. When I cover the IR emitter on a dark night and I can't see a thing, and then reveal the IR light again, it always impresses me. It's these exceptionally dark nights that I'm most thankful for a dual setup too. You lose lots of spatial awareness with a single monocular on a very dark night, where you can't see anything out of that natural eye. So is having two digital monoculars better than having one? I think so. Ultimately, the added depth is great and makes for a very functional system. Do you need to start with two? Absolutely not. Similar to the way building an AR is fun because you can do it piece by piece, you can do the same here. Grab a single Wraith, use it as a supplemental piece of night gear just for a bit. While you're doing that, snag a helmet and the mounts you want to use and spend some time with one, and then later down the line you can add in a second unit. This makes the most sense for a dual digital setup to me for sure. Sure, jumping right into a dual setup is great also, but most people will jump to saying for $1,500 you could spend it on a used PVS-14. And they wouldn't be wrong, I suppose, but then I would fall back to the argument that if we're not talking a monocular setup at the end, then your ultimate investment will be way closer to 4K in the analog realm. By the time you find two PVS-14s, a bridge for them, even used. So ultimately, yes, I still see the value in a dual digital setup. It's not going to replace or beat an analog setup at this point, but two digital nods is still better than one in my opinion, and digital nods are still a better option as opposed to not having night vision at all. They'll serve you nearly as well as a PVS-14 in lots of scenarios, barring direct PvP with an adversary that also has better night vision than you. The IR footprint you do make is very large, all things considered, but if you're an outdoorsman who wants to be able to see in the dark, it's absolutely a win. The image is super crispy, and as far as being able to ID targets at range, the sky's the limit when you pair it with the right IR light.
Maybe that house out there, yeah, we're hitting those trees. But really, the sky's the limit. If you had a powerful IR, you see what I mean? Like, we're seeing that far out. So it's not that the device can't see that far. It's just that I don't have something that can illuminate that far right now. This is only using one illuminator as well, the one on my left eye.
I think they can absolutely work as a great training tool and a gateway drug into night vision, and I will for sure always have a use for them. Even as I graduate to analog nods, I'll be glad to have two really great digital monoculars that I can hand to my friends or family and still have some fun with. I am really thankful for the training I've been able to get while using the Wraiths, much in the same way that running visible lasers for years on my builds got me acclimated to the tactics I would have to employ while using IR lasers. Running the dual Wraiths is helping me get the training in that I can while I can, and when I can ultimately afford a katana, I'll be trained up on the basics. So I'll get to just enjoy the wide FOV without having to learn a whole new system from scratch. Only you can decide if digital nods are going to serve you well, or if you should just save up and snag some analog tubes in the end. But don't let anyone convince you not to buy or to buy something just because they think it's lame or because they think it's cool. What's right for one guy won't be right for everyone, but I know for now, I'm going to rock my Wraiths. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this or found it informative, please leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might get a kick out of this. Being such a new channel, every share goes really far, so thank you guys. I appreciate you sharing my content more than you know. I've been very interested in what the world of closed emitter red dots has to offer, and Swamp Fox recently piqued my interest with the Kraken. I'll be testing this optic over the next few weeks and would love to get your guys' thoughts. Do you think closed emitter dots are the way of the future or just a trend? If If you have any questions about the gear or weapons I run, you can find detailed build lists for almost all my kit over at bargainbintactician.com. I also recently dropped some merch over on that site as well. Shirts, beanies, jackets, hats, slaps, I've got a little bit of everything. Thank you so much to those that have already found my site and ordered some goodies. You rock. Feel no pressure to order anything at all though. I appreciate each and every one of you just for choosing to share your time with me. Until next time, Bargain Bin out.